just going to wait 5 more minutes. Because usually people come in.
Well, I'm taping him anyway. I'm
No,
taping
that's
him the next
fine.
5 minutes. Otherwise, the flag will go off again.
Get all the banter in the shaft. Yeah, the original's so small.
Well, I better receive it.
Actually, those aren't so much in order. I was just going to say that's from. We just rediscovered those. I forgot that I had those. When we emptied that storm water, I've been unpacking back boxes. When that storm hit in May, about 3 or 4 years ago, we lost our roof. And I just had to hurriedly pack my house and put it in storage. Oh man, that was a disaster for me. I had to re-roof from the alley to the street. Okay, I'm still mad at the 83 freeze for a papaya tree outpost, I'll tell you that.
It's recording?
Yeah.
Welcome everyone. Good evening. Welcome to our Telling Our Stories. This is going to be our coming on our third year of presenting these programs, which started back in 2000. And the reason why we have these is it's our oral history program. We try to invite individuals from the community or from around the area to come do a topic on the history of Port Isabel. We're really wanting to get families involved too, so they can come talk about their own family heritage, and we're working on that. And if you have your family background that you want, that they're from the area, you can do a program for us because that's part of our archives, and we like to build it. And we have a number of really interesting topics that we already recorded. First of all, I'd like to thank the Laguna Mata Museum Foundation for having our refreshments here tonight. We'll start the program. For the record, I've always said this is Port Isabel, Texas, the Treasure of the Gulf Museum. We start at 7:08. And did I tell you, did I introduce
the date.
the date? Thank you. Thursday, June 26, 2003. Can I tell you who I was?
No.
My name's Edward Meza. It's been a long day. Director of the museum here in Port Isabel. And I'd like to introduce our speaker tonight. Everyone knows Rod Bates. He's a local historian. He owns Rio Bravo Gallery. And he and his wife are wonderful supporters of the museum. And he's going to do a topic on local history.
Indeed. I seem to be just as prepared as Edward tonight, so. Actually, Steve and I were supposed to do tonight, and I've tried to find Steve all day long and can't find him, so as a result, you're stuck with me. I want to, first off, I'm going to do a first-time viewing for most of the people here on a historical photographic yard-long or roll or panoramic view of Port Isabel. We're 99% sure it's Port Isabel. This is a brand new discovery, and it dates to the Spanish-American War. And this is the angle of view. What you're looking at is you're looking from the west toward the bay on this panoramic view. And here's the angle as best we can get it on the map of Port Isabel. You're looking from the west toward the bay, and this is your basic angle. And what I have here is the whole panoramic view, and it's quite interesting because it starts all the way over here, and it's fuzzy and hard to see. But these photos are very small. They're only about this big, and they're wrapped up on like gauze or something like that, like medical gauze. And they were in a roll, and they were in a collection of militaria that my uncle in Houston purchased just outside of Galveston in some little town. And the reason that we think it's Port Isabel, we're almost positive, is the lighthouse right here and the hill structure. And if you look over here, I'll leave these out so everybody can see, but the lighthouse is plainly visible. The bay is where it should be, the panorama, and the thing you have to remember when you look at this series of photographs is Port Isabel is no longer like this. The hills that you see right here were all plowed flat in 1928, and the plains that the troops are camping on are now where channels exist and turning basins and things like that. So the whole landscape's completely different. But if we prove to be correct on this photograph, this will be the earliest known photograph of the Port Isabel Lighthouse. And I'm pretty sure we have it. I'm not, like I say, I'm 99% sure. Now the way we can date this is very simple. There's some troops. All throughout this photograph is a huge camp of troops. They're sitting on cartridge boxes here. And if you get a magnifying glass out there, it's sitting on cartridge boxes of 30-40 Craig cartridges, which was the classic ammunition used in the late Indian Wars right on up through the Spanish-American War. And I'll tell you, after piecing some things together, further on in the photograph, like right here, you'll see some supply wagons. Now there's something very interesting to note in these photographs. There's no mechanized. This is all horse-drawn stuff, okay? Number two, you're actually using mule-drawn wagons, all right? And that's very important as well. This is a cavalry unit because the troops are wearing their leg guards and their yellow scarfs, all right? And you have US on the tarps covering the wagons, all right? So there's a lot of clues in here. Another clue we get is right here. This is a later 1890s photograph because this man right here, sitting in there, is the only one that's out of character in the whole photograph. He filmed himself, the photographer. He had a battery-controlled panoramic camera. Okay? So that's strictly late 1890s technology. All right? Now my research indicates that what this probably is all the forts along the Rio Grande Valley in South Texas and up to like Fort McIntosh and stuff have all come to Fort Brown and then come overland to Port Isabel, or probably also by the Rio Grande Railroad, and they're disembarking for the Spanish-American War. That's what we got, is the South Texas troops leaving for the Spanish-American War. This photo right here is rather interesting because if one looks right here in this photograph, there's a column of smoke, which I'm almost positive is going to be the steamship coming to pick up the troops. All right? Also, you'll remember that Port Isabel, the main population center of Port Isabel was not around the lighthouse. It was further to the south and east. And if you look at this photograph, way, way over down the hill, here's the town. There's scattered buildings all over, but here's the town down here. The other thing that's of note is that there are actual, like, sheds or what have you coming in right through here in what appears to be a boxcar right here on what looks like a line. And that's the railroad coming in on this thing. And the thing to remember when you look at this series of photographs is to remember it wasn't a panoramic camera in the sense we have today, where you can smoothly take a picture of the whole countryside. This camera had to be programmed in, and it would actually, he would do it in flat sections. So you're looking at like an octagon instead of a smooth, round, ovaled image. So it's a little confusing. The canals are not there. I'll tell you where I believe this photograph was taken from, right where the Port Isabel waterworks are, up on top of the hill behind the Boys and Girls Club. That is the hill I believe this camp sat on. So I thought that was neat, and I thought I'd share it with everybody tonight. The research indicates that we're right on the money with it, so that's kind of nice. The other topic I wanted to bring out tonight, since I had some troops here to look at and everything, people don't realize how much the Mexican Revolution affected Port Isabel. It had a vast and profound effect. Now this is a group of artifacts from Mexican troops and what have you during the Revolution, all from this area. This photograph right here is Luciano Blanco's cavalry after they captured Matamoros. And this is Luciano Blanco's right-hand man, Garcia, and his staff. And these were the people that were involved in the 1913 Battle of Matamores, all right? That began in our area because the revolution seemed like a long ways away. But it began in our particular area, what was called the Border Scare. And there's some great books about Runyon photos and stuff like that. What I want to concentrate tonight on is the troops that came to Port Isabel. And I know of two groups, this one being one of them. This is a series of cards, and it's a great series of cards. Everybody is labeled. I mean, this thing is just fabulous. But it's a series of cards of an Ohio, was it Ohio? No, it's Iowa. From the 3rd Iowa, pardon me, the 2nd, and they came to Fort Brown and wound up being stationed in Port Isabel. And I'm going to leave this here. You'll see a lot of familiar photos in here, like this one right here. This is the train they disembarked off of. And there's some real treasures in here too. Besides the fact that everybody's labeled, there's some absolute treasures in here, like this one right here. Here's the water vendor's burro with the water barrel right here. And you've got 3 soldiers standing around. And by the way, we can name all 3 of them by looking at the other photos that are all labeled. But the first lieutenant is seated upon the burro with a box of cigars in his hand, and the whole scene takes place right in front of the Champion General Store. So there's some great photos in here. There is a truly rare photograph in here. It's the only one I know of like it, and it's right here. And this one puzzled me for a long time, and I finally figured it out. All I had to do was read the caption, but you know, I don't do that. I look at the photos and I try to figure them out for myself. The caption says, going through one of the lakes on the road to the point. That's going through the salt lakes out here, outside of Brownsville, between Brownsville and Port Isabel. That's the only photograph I know of that train on one of those bridges out over that salt lake out there. And whoever had the foresight to stand on top of the passenger car and take that photo, I don't know, but we're sure glad they did, I'll tell you that. But we have the triumphal entry of the U.S. military into Fort Brown here, and we've just got some photographs in here that are great. Port Isabel, of course, during that period of time, had been affected by other wars in the past. Largely. I mean, the Mexican War really caused us to get modern civilization here, and the lighthouse was built as a result of the Mexican War. The increased traffic. Now this photo most people have seen. It's a typical photo of the lighthouse, but you'll notice something about this card. You can always date your lighthouse cards by whether or not the hill is there. That hill didn't exist until 1928, and this one predates 1928 by a long shot. This one's probably 1890s to about 1910, somewhere in that ballpark. But it's great because you're from the west looking east toward the bay. Then on this one, this is the rare one. Once again, no hill. This one you're from the bay looking toward the west. That's the one you never see right there. It's the only one I've ever seen like it. And it gives you an excellent view of what the residences were looking like on the hill and everything like that. And if you study these old maps that show the plots, you can see that we just looked at these houses right here, and then in the one looking westward, we looked at these houses here, some of which were obscured by mesquite and ebony trees. Here is a view of the bay looking by the hotel toward the west from up on the lighthouse. And this is just prior to the troops getting here. And then the next one is just west of that toward the western part of the town. And you can see it was fairly sparsely populated in between the lighthouse and the actual town itself, which was down in what was called the Wireless later Los Wireless. The businesses and buildings that were main structures in town, the Champion Building, of course. Then you had the old Catholic church, and that's a very rare photograph right there. You just don't see that one very often. You had the Point Isabel Hotel. On the island, over by the Coast Guard station, we had the Vega restaurant. And of course, the Vegas are still figuring very prominently into our history. And for for those of us that like to ship and receive cargoes, we had the railroad pier with its landing at the end, and that the railroad would actually back right out on the pier and receive cargoes and stuff like that. This is the pier that our Spanish-American war troops were disembarking from. All right, then here's a view of the pier from the shore, looking out, and it looked far more impressive standing on the end of it, looking toward the. You just hoped you didn't step in a crack, I'm sure, as you were walking off. Then we had the United States Life-Saving Service here in Port Isabel, and that's a branch of the United States government that's often forgotten when we talk about Port Isabel history. But these people, they were very brave men. They would only launch their boats when somebody else was in trouble, meaning they were crazy enough to launch their boats when nobody else should be in the Gulf. And that's what they were trained to do.
Now, was that on the island or Port Isabel?
This was right on the foot of the island, about where the Jetty's restaurant used to be, where today is the, there's a bait stand in that area and stuff like that. That's where this was. And I'm starting to form a collection of items, you know, hats and buttons and stuff from these guys. It's hard stuff to find. Also, we had the Coast Guard in our town here at that time. And this is a rare photograph of the Coast Guardsmen right around the time of the border disturbance. And something you just don't see very often. You know, we think of the Coast Guard being here now, but they've been there a long time doing their job. The pier itself, well, we also had water vendors. They were very important because we had no municipal water. It's just appalling to children today when you tell them you didn't have a flushing toilet. What? You know what I'm saying? They can't imagine. Well, how about not being able to turn the spigot on? There's the spigot right there, you know, and when I tell them that, they go, huh? You know, they can't believe it. But these men, there's an old man with his water cart that says the Point Isabel Waterworks of yesterday. And this one right here, he's a very familiar guy, but I can't find him, and he's in front of one of the residents. I think this is the LaRoche residence, and shows it. That's an old Runyon.
Yeah.
Okay, and then this one I truly love, and I'll tell you why. This one right here is a little boy with his 1910 to 15 sneakers on, selling water. Shows the hard work that people did, and it also is because I knew this man. He was a good friend of mine. He was a coin collector, and he lived out the remainder of his life in Hidalgo, Texas. His name was Juan Garza, and he was a good friend of mine. And when he saw that picture, he said, "I haven't seen one of those in years." And I said, "You mean you used to have one?" He says, "That's me." Just real casually. I said, "What?" He goes, "No, that's me." So that was his first job in life, and he did quite well in life. Port Isabel, we enjoyed our vacation days. Here's 4th of July, everybody waiting their turn to get on a shallow water sloop and go out and sail the bay. And this one right here is a May Day celebration that occurred just prior to the troops getting here. This was 1914. And all the girls from the Catholic Church put on nice little costumes their mom made, and they had a May Day celebration here in town with all the fixings and trimmings. It was fun. And everybody had a great time. The other thing that was a great attraction for us at the time, and you got to remember that commercial fishing wasn't sport fishing wasn't a big deal yet, was the beach. It was considered not a fun thing to do, but a very therapeutic thing to do, to go dip in the salt water. So people from all over this area came here, and they would ferry across, stay at the hotels over there, and they spent their day at the beach. And they'd all get out in the salt water. This is the Morales family. And Mr. Morales was a famous photographer from Brownsville, and he and his family came to Point Isabel often. And this is his family enjoying the beach one day. He's also related to the Benavides family. Well, when the war scare occurred, there was this kind of stuff on the Mexican side of the river. And that's the remnants of the Battle of Matamores in 1913. These are the ones that hadn't yet been identified. And that pile got a little bit smaller, but the rest, who were just unidentified, wound up getting burned. Just cremated right on the spot. But This right here shows family members looking for their young Johnnies out in the pile. And so as a result of it, the United States government sealed the one bridge across the river. And they started really watching carts. There were some cars that came across at that time, but very few. And box cars and stuff. They started really watching who came across and stuff. A lot of the wealthy of Matamores moved to Brownsville at this time. And so they were doing their job. You can see there's some soldiers from Fort Brown there kind of trying to keep order at the border. But what was happening were troops that were in the rebel faction were jumping the river, stealing cattle so they could eat. They were robbing people. It got so bad that just outside of Los Fresnos, now we're talking 16 miles from us as we sit, a man was killed by robbers, and they were later captured and confessed and were summarily dispatched. But the Mexican Revolution had people really afraid in this area. The ranchers that lived slightly out of towns all were constantly armed. I've got some photographs somewhere that show farmers as they go out to their crops. They'll have 2 6-shooters on, a gun over their shoulder, and one in their hands at all times. I mean, they were carrying probably 40 rounds on their person in ready-to-fire arms at any moment. And, of course, the famous fight that occurred between a civilian rancher and the Mexican banditos was over at McAllen, on the McAllen Ranch. Mr. Argyle McAllen actually had a 7-hour, I think it was, battle with several banditos that came to steal his cattle and rob his ranch. And of course I knew him. He was a fascinating man to talk to. He kept me spellbound for hours when I'd listen to his stories about ranching and actually fighting these bandits and stuff like that. And every time I ever had a question about a token or something, one time I had a token from Brownsville and I could not find where this business was located. And I said, Mr. McAllen, have you ever heard of this place? And he goes, oh, sure, honey. Remember, we used to get malts at this place. It was a confectionery. And he knew exactly, he told me everything there was to know about it. So, as a result, the U.S. government shipped, did I touch on this one? No, I didn't. This was the final straw. They were coming over here and hitting civilians. Civilians were complaining mightily. But a raid occurred at the La Parra Ranch, and 3 American soldiers were killed while they were on duty, 1915. Congress went up in arms, and they sent thousands of troops to the U.S. border. In our area, most of them went to Fort Brown. Here's the old gates to Fort Brown. Here's what Fort Brown looked like years ago. And they engaged in all kinds of field activities. Now, this is just hilarious. This was you can tell things were being invented too fast for their own good. The engineers were way ahead of themselves. This little contraption right here is a machine gun motorcycle. And you'll notice one minor flaw in the machine gun motorcycle. The machine gunner had great protection, but the motorcycle driver had 0 armor. So that was kind of a useless implement. I think they went the way of the square light bulb or something, I don't know. Here's a pontoon bridge that the engineers constructed across the Rio Grande River just to say they could do it. And here is something else. This was your field wireless. Now this affects us in a big way. The reason that South Shore Drive section of town is called Los Wireless is because the U.S. government in 1916 constructed the wireless tower down there. It was a communications tower, and it was used after the border scare by shipping and, you know, the Coast Guard, and everybody got a little use out of it. Here is how our troops got to Port Isabel. A group of troops, we know that the 1st Illinois Cavalry, there were some New York boys, the 1st New York, and there was the 2nd Iowa that wound up in Port Isabel. And I believe there's others, but I haven't found concrete proof of it. But anyway, they all got here by train and by a new item in the United States Army, the mechanized cavalry. Yes, sir, we got the motor cavalry here. And this one right here is really nice because it says, on the road to the point. So they're on their way to Point Isabel in their new trucks. Now here's the camp This one right here, let me set these down. This shows where the Illinois cavalry camped, and so did many other soldiers camped there. If you study this, over here is the graveyard that's still present today over by the Trade Winds Inn. Is it Trade Winds? Southwind. Thank you. Well, I'm glad Rex isn't here. But they camped all throughout that flat. Now today that's used by fishermen, and it's still kind of a salt flat out in there. There's a couple houses out in there. Here's the mid section of the camp. Right here. You can see some boats and stuff over in the side of the bay. And then here is a close-up of the tents that the men stayed in. You can see to the upper left-hand side, I believe it is, the upper left-hand, you can see the graveyard once again. Now the church was just down from there, just out of all these photographs. So here is the famous wireless station. Now in the real photo card, the wireless is a little hard to see. But this was down by South Shore Drive, down where Reyes Bakery is, and down in that area where it was. This is a little easier to see. It's a litho of the same thing, and you can see the wires going across here, and they actually built a couple of government barracks around the bottom of it, and they had generators to get the power to go through there, and then they could communicate through wireless means. This was wholly untested. The Mexican Border Service was the first place this was tested, and it was used widely, of course, in World War I overseas. And these same troops wound up going overseas and serving over there. Let's see, okay, we've been through those. Within this group of men, and there's some fantastic cards in here if you all want to come up and look at them. This is, by the way, one of my favorite Border Service cards. It shows so much about the Border Service. They're standing on what is the Brownsville, Mexico Railroad Bridge, the old international bridge, and they're right at the pylon, the international boundary. And if you note, the Mexican soldier is very proper. He's buttoned to the neck. He's at attention, and he looks like he means business. While the American, his collar's unbuttoned, his hat is tilted, he's laying against the rail with a cigarette in his hands going, "What am I doing here?" You know what I mean? And it just says so much about the Mexican Border Service.
Is this the B&M bridge that you're talking about?
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
All of these American troops, when they first got shipped to the border, thought they had visions of, you know, Congressional Medals of Honor shooting Mexican bandits as they saved the girls of Brownsville. And it just didn't materialize. They wound up doing nothing. And in Mexico, of course, they were on guard for their lives the whole time. So I just love this photograph because it says so much of the period. They're all through here. Like this one right here is such a rare photograph, and it was hard for me at first to piece where it was, but I finally figured it out. They're on a sailing vessel right by the railroad pier, and there's the four main characters in our drama here, all getting their photograph made here in Port Isabel. And there's some other great ones in here. Like here's a photo that they took from on top of the federal building in Brownsville. And there's some great Port Isabels in here. There's a wireless shot right there. This one's out on the pier. The soldier's about to hire the boat that they just got photographed in a minute ago. Oh, here's a dandy. This was on the outskirts of Port Isabel for their enjoyment, the first and last chance saloon. Get them coming and going, man. There's one in here, it's very hard to see because it's so microscopic, but it actually shows the Rio Grande Railroad train. Is this one? No, that's the wireless. But it shows the railroad train backed out on the pier, which is something you don't see every day. Here's one of the passenger boats that took them to the island at that time, back in the teens, and this one was called the Julia B. And so that's something you don't see very often. I didn't know the Julia B existed until I got this group of photos.
Was that Sullivan's?
I don't know. It could have very well been, but you're talking 1916.
Oh,
So, you know, it's possible, but it's kind of hard to piece together information that far back at times. Here we go. Here's the one I wanted to bring out. This one's marvelous because you can see the train is actually backing on the railroad pier itself. And that's the only one I've ever seen of its nature as well. So there are some fantastic views, and the thing that makes this little group of photos even more of a treasure is they were all compiled by one man during his little stay down here in the border before World War I. And we get some of the most unique snapshots of Port Isabel and Brownsville out of his group that he kept that I've ever seen. And a lot of these are, you know, I mean, you're going to be the first people outside of my family and friends that have seen them. So enjoy yourself when you come up, and I'll try to walk you through it as best I can. Thank you for hearing me. Is there any questions?
Was Blackjack here?
He was not. He was in Brownsville.
Well, they never
Pershing.
came up here.
Pershing, Funston, and Allen and Parker all had a powwow in early 1917 in Brownsville. Yep. Yes, ma'am.
You said they came over to the hotels on South Padre Island. How many were there at that time?
Well, that's kind of sketchy. That depends on when the casino was built.
Yeah.
And what do you call hotels? They were throwing up little shanties just to get some of the troops, you know, and driftwood shacks were constructed. And, I mean, so what were they calling hotels? I mean, yeah, we won't